My in-laws pressed the ledger into my hands and told me to run. If you stay here, you'll die, they said. My father-in-law, Eleanor Bishop, placed the old leather-bound book in my hand. Run, Sarah. If you stay here, they'll kill you. I followed her instructions, hiding in the shadows where I witnessed a scene of unimaginable horror. Today's story centers on Sarah Parker, a kind and patient woman who silently endures her hypocritical in-laws while working as the bookkeeper for their seafood processing company. One rainy autumn night, her father-in-law, Walter Bishop, the chairman of Bishop Fisheries, suddenly took a turn for the worse. Before he died, he secretly handed Sarah an old ledger. Run, he whispered. If you stay here, you'll die. A sense of dread washed over Sarah. She slipped outside and hid only to witness the terrible truth. What was that terrible truth, Walter? What's wrong? Simon, Eleanor, get down here quickly, Sarah screamed as she saw Mr. Bishop suddenly slumped from his wheelchair, collapsing onto the cold tile floor. A dreary October rain was lashing against the windows of their Seattle home, bringing a chill that seeped into the bones. Mr. Bishop's eyes rolled back in his head, his mouth twisted to one side, and white foam trickled from his lips. Blue veins stood out on his gaunt hands as they trembled in the air as if trying to grasp the last fraying threads of life. Sarah dropped to her knees frantically, using the hem of her blouse to wipe the foam from her father-in-law's mouth. As she stood to use the landline to call 911, Mr. Bishop suddenly grabbed her wrist with all his remaining strength. His nails dug into her flesh, drawing blood. Gasping for breath, he pressed something rough and crinkled into her palm. It was an old ledger wrapped in worn, weathered plastic. Run, he rasped, his voice thin and broken, lost in the clap of thunder outside. If you stay here, you die. Sarah stared at her father-in-law, a cold sweat breaking out on her back. The look in Mr. Bishop's eyes wasn't the fear of a man facing death, but an urgent, desperate plea mixed with terror. Before Sarah could react, heavy footsteps thundered down the wooden staircase. Her husband Simon and her mother-in-law Eleanor rushed into the living room. Simon was in a faded t-shirt still reeking of stale beer and the dust of the construction sites he supposedly managed. Eleanor had hastily thrown on a navy blue robe, a wooden rosary still wrapped around her wrist. "Get out of the way! What did you do to him?" Eleanor shrieked, shoving Sarah roughly aside. She gave her gasping husband a quick cold glance, then yelled at Simon. "What are you standing there for? Go get the car. The ambulance will take forever in this storm." Simon flinched, grabbed Sarah by the arm, and dragged her toward the front door. "You wait out on the porch. Go down to the corner and hail a cab if you see one. You're just in the way here." The heavy wooden door slammed shut in Sarah's face. The cold rain lashed down, soaking her instantly. In her hand, still hidden in the folds of her clothes, she clutched the ledger. A terrible premonition told her something was profoundly wrong. Eleanor and Simon's reactions were too cold, too controlled. There were no tears, none of the usual panic of watching a loved one die. Instead of waiting, as Simon told her, Sarah backed away from the door. She crept to the side of the house, hiding behind a stack of old, pungent-smelling fishing crates. The spot was beyond the reach of the porch light, and the darkness swallowed her small, trembling frame. Through a crack in the curtains, the yellow light from inside cast distorted shadows on the wall. Sarah held her breath. Simon didn't grab a raincoat or go to the garage. He calmly walked to the kitchen, got a mop, and began cleaning the water Walter had spilled from his glass earlier. From the sofa, Eleanor bent down, reached deep under the end table, and pulled out a small plastic pill bottle. It was Mr. Bishop's daily blood pressure medication. She unscrewed the cap and walked swiftly to the downstairs bathroom. The toilet flushed loudly. She returned, tossed the empty bottle into the trash, and looked down with chilling indifference at Mr. Bishop, whose convulsions had stopped his chest, now only faintly rising and falling. Sarah clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle the scream that was clawing its way up her throat. Her limbs felt like jelly. They were murdering him. A perfect crime disguised as a stroke. And she, the poor daughter-in-law from a working-class family, would be the last person with him before it happened. She would be the perfect scapegoat, the perfect shield for a charge of manslaughter or some other terrible crime they would invent. Mr. Bishop's last words echoed in her ears. "Run." Sarah backed away slowly toward the fence. She didn't dare go back inside for anything. She let the biting rain strike her face as she climbed the low brick wall and dropped into the muddy alley filled with grimy puddles. She ran, disappearing into the pitch-black darkness. "Hey, where you going? Get inside the bus, before you're soaked." The gruff driver of the old charter bus, exhaling a cloud of stale smoke, nudged Sarah's side. Sarah flinched, wrapping her arms around her goosebumped skin, and climbed the steps. She had walked nearly 3 miles navigating the narrow back streets of Seattle to escape. She couldn't take a taxi or walk on main roads, terrified of every headlight that swept across her face. By the time she reached the Greyhound station, she was drenched, her white shirt and jeans splattered with mud. "A one-way ticket, please." "The furthest you go tonight," Sarah said, pulling a damp, crumpled bill from her pocket and handing it to the ticket agent. The tattooed man snatched the bill and pointed to the back of the bus. "All the way to the back. This route goes straight to Astoria, Oregon. If you want off sooner, tell the driver 10 minutes ahead." The bus lurched forward, its air thick with the smell of vomit diesel and the fishy tang of illicit seafood crates hidden in the luggage compartment. Sarah curled up on a narrow, grimy seat with a musty blanket. Only then did hot tears finally stream down her pale cheeks. Just a few hours ago, she was the dutiful wife painstakingly balancing the ledgers for the family business, saving every penny for them. Now she was a fugitive with no belongings, no future, just the wet clothes on her back, and the mysterious ledger her father-in-law had left her. She waited until the lights inside the bus were turned off with only the faint glow of streetlights passing by the scratched window. Only then did Sarah dare to pull the ledger from inside her shirt. The plastic wrapping was torn, and rainwater had seeped in, discoloring and warping the edges. Sarah opened it. There were no printed lines certifying a bank balance. Inside on the yellowed lined paper were columns of handwritten numbers. It was Mr. Bishop's distinct, slanted, and trembling script. Alongside the long, seemingly random strings of numbers were strange symbols and abbreviations. On the last page, half blurred by blue ink, was a short address: Miller's Cannery and Smokehouse, Astoria, Oregon. Astoria. Sarah repeated the name under her breath. She had heard Mr. Bishop talk about the Oregon coast from his youth, but he had never mentioned a Miller or a cannery. Why on the brink of death did he entrust this address to her? What did these numbers mean? Sarah hugged her knees, her head throbbing. She couldn't go back to her own family. They were poor farmers working the dirt in eastern Washington. Eleanor and Simon were more than capable of tracking them down, harassing and threatening them. They would have noticed her disappearance by now. Simon, with his shady connections in the construction trade and the port underworld, would have no trouble sending people to find her. She had to go where they would least expect it. Driver Sarah called toward the front of the bus. "I'll be getting off in Astoria." The rhythmic snores of the other passengers drowned out the fear in her voice. The bus sped through the darkness, leaving behind her life of submission and a terrible crime being buried under the Seattle rain. "Who are you looking for? What's your business at this old cannery so early in the morning?" A gruff, deep voice, laced with the smell of strong tobacco, came from behind a stack of massive wooden barrels. Sarah spun around, startled. A middle-aged man, shirtless and tanned, with skin glistening with sweat, was approaching, carrying 2 large plastic tubs filled with fish scales. Sarah took a frightened step back. She had gotten off the bus in Astoria while it was still dark. After asking for directions from a few early-rising vendors, she had walked down a dusty road near the port to finally find Miller's Cannery. It wasn't a modern facility, but a collection of dilapidated buildings with rusted tin roofs teetering on the water's edge. "I'm looking for a Mr. Miller," she said. The man narrowed his eyes, slammed the 2 tubs on the ground, and plopped down on a scratched plastic chair. "I'm Miller. Whose kid are you? You here to collect a debt? Or looking for a job? If you're looking for an easy, high-paying gig, you're in the wrong place. Don't waste my time." Sarah took a deep breath, trying to swallow the bitterness rising in her throat. She stepped forward and carefully pulled the plastic-wrapped ledger from her pocket. She opened it to the last page with Mr. Bishop's handwriting and placed it on the wooden table. "My name is Sarah. I'm Walter Bishop's daughter-in-law from Seattle. He told me to find you." Miller, who had been about to light a cigarette, froze. His weathered eyes stared intently at the writing on the page. His calloused hand, as it reached for the edge of the ledger, trembled slightly. The air grew thick and silent, broken only by the buzzing of flies around a puddle of dirty water. Miller folded the ledger and stuffed it into the pocket of his worn work pants. He didn't ask why Mr. Bishop had sent his daughter-in-law, nor did he question Sarah's ragged and miserable appearance. He took a long drag from his cigarette, exhaled a thick cloud of smoke, and gestured with his chin toward the end of the cannery. "Follow me." Sarah silently followed Miller down a narrow, muddy path, slick with fish guts and brine. Shirtless workers hauling salt and anchovies stared at her with open, questioning eyes. Miller stopped in front of a wooden shack made of salvaged planks with a broken slate roof perched precariously over the water. "You can stay here. Keep an eye on the anchovy barrels nearby. You get 3 meals a day at the mess hall. I can't pay you yet, so we'll figure that out as we go." The shack was tiny, barely fitting a creaky wooden platform bed with a torn mat and a small space for her non-existent luggage. There was no window, no private bathroom, and the rotting wooden walls let the sea breeze blow right through, carrying the foul stench from a nearby fish waste processing plant. But for a fugitive with no money, a clean room was a luxury she couldn't afford. Sarah nodded and lay her exhausted body on the stiff mat. She ignored the buzzing of hungry mosquitoes and closed her eyes, beginning to learn how to breathe the salty fish-laden air of the Oregon coast. Back in Seattle, in the spacious living room of the Bishop residence, the air was thick with the scent of funereal lilies. A hastily arranged memorial featured a stern-faced portrait of Walter Bishop. The sounds of forced sobbing filled the room. Simon, wearing a black armband, was prostrate on the floor beside the casket. Every time a mourner arrived, he would wail dramatically, pounding his fists on the tile. "Dad. You left us too soon. How are Mom and I supposed to live without you, Dad?" Simon's face was a mess of tears and snot. His grief-stricken display moved the neighbors to tears. They patted his shoulder in sympathy, praising him as a devoted son. In a corner of the room, Eleanor buried her head in the shoulders of her friends from her Bible study group, her rosary beads clicking rapidly in her hand. When the president of the neighborhood association came in to offer her condolences, Eleanor immediately looked up, her eyes brimming with tears, and spoke in a sorrowful voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Our family is just so unlucky. My husband had a sudden heart attack. And that daughter-in-law of mine. I can't believe it." In all the chaos, she cleaned out the safe, all the cash and my jewelry, and ran off with some man she was seeing. My Walter was gasping for his last breath, and she didn't even try to help. She just turned her back and left. Such a vile, wicked woman. Whispers spread through the room. People who had once praised Sarah as kind and hardworking now cursed her name, calling her a thief, a shameless adulterer who had abandoned her dying father-in-law. A perfect narrative of guilt had been flawlessly crafted and placed upon Sarah by Eleanor and Simon. But behind his mask of grief, Simon had no time for sorrow. That night, when the flow of mourners thinned, he slipped out to the back porch and lit a cigarette, inhaling deeply. A man with a shaved head, tattoos covering both arms, and a black shirt unbuttoned to his chest entered through the back gate. "So what's the deal, boss? Is it handled? Are we cleared to move?" the bald man asked, spitting on the ground. Simon threw his cigarette down and crushed it with his shoe. His voice was cold, devoid of any trace of a grieving son's sadness. "My father's cremation is tomorrow night. Get your guys out there. Check every bus station and train station from Washington to California. Find Sarah Parker. She left in a hurry, so she couldn't have gotten far." "And when we find her," the bald man asked, "take everything she has." Simon clenched his jaw, his teeth grinding. "Bring her back alive, and you find that black plastic-wrapped ledger. If she resists, break her legs and throw her in a van. I'll cover all expenses. Keep it clean and don't let the cops get a whiff of it. If that ledger falls into the wrong hands, my whole family is finished." Simon pulled a thick wad of $100 bills from his pocket and pressed it into the thug's hand. A cruel light glinted in his eyes like a predator closing in on its prey. The hunt had officially begun. "Write down this morning's mackerel numbers correctly. If you space out and we have a loss, you're out of here," Miller said, tapping his cigarette on the edge of the scratched wooden table, gesturing with his chin at a pile of fish-stained ledgers. Sarah nodded meekly and opened the crumpled papers. For days, she had worked tirelessly from dawn until late at night. Miller didn't ask her to do the heavy lifting, hauling salt bags, or stirring the fermenting fish, knowing it was too much for a woman. Instead, he put her in charge of recording the daily ins and outs of the cannery's fish supply. In return, Sarah received 3 simple meals and a place to sleep in the shabby wooden shack that creaked with every gust of wind from the Pacific. The nights in Astoria were pitch black. The exhausted workers snored loudly on cots outside their snores, mixing with the sound of the crashing waves to create a mournful chorus. Inside her shack, Sarah sat with her knees drawn up on the creaky wooden bed, a small kerosene lamp casting a dim glow. She carefully retrieved Mr. Bishop's ledger from under her pillow. For days, the image of her father-in-law, his eyes rolling back as he died, had haunted her every time she closed her eyes. Under the yellow lamplight, Sarah stared at the crooked handwritten numbers. At first glance, anyone might think they were bank account numbers or safe combinations. But years of working with invoices and spreadsheets at the seafood company gave Sarah a gut feeling. This wasn't a record of deposits. She rewrote each column of numbers vertically in a notepad. The first column always started with a large monetary figure, followed by a jumble of letters like IW and LC. The second column was a series of dates from the past year. The third column was another series of underlined numbers. Sarah frowned, tapping the torn mat with the end of her pen. IW must be industrial waste, she thought, and LC has to mean Simon's construction. The first piece of a terrifying puzzle clicked into place in her mind. Her husband Simon's construction company was a sham. It only took on small cosmetic jobs, building fences, repairing roofs. Yet the monthly financial report Sarah had been forced to prepare showed enormous quantities of materials being purchased. Sarah's hands trembled. She turned to the next page, and the numbers began to form a clear picture of a criminal enterprise. The sharp-minded Walter Bishop, trapped in a failing body, had been silently tracking and recording his wife and son's every suspicious transaction. Eleanor and Simon were laundering vast sums of black money for a massive industrial waste smuggling ring that operated through the port of Seattle. They created phantom invoices for construction materials to turn dirty money into clean cash, which was then funneled into offshore accounts. Sarah bit her lip until she tasted the salty tang of blood. Her mother-in-law, who preached morality and attended church every Sunday, was part of a filthy criminal organization. And Mr. Bishop's death wasn't a sudden stroke. He held their secrets in his hands. This ledger was a death warrant hanging over Eleanor and Simon's heads. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. She quickly hid the ledger in her shirt. She realized she wasn't just running from a false accusation of theft. She was being hunted by vicious predators who would tear apart anyone who stood in their way. "Hey, pour me another beer. It's on me tonight," Chloe's shrill voice echoed through a shabby roadside seafood shack near the Astoria bus terminal, its floor littered with oyster shells. Chloe was Simon's younger sister, the spoiled only daughter Eleanor doted on. She was lazy to the bone. In her mid-20s, she still mooched off her mother, spending her days dressed in flashy clothes and hanging out with local delinquents. Her father had been dead for less than a month, but Chloe was already in Oregon with her friends blowing through the condolence money. Sarah was struggling to unload a heavy crate of iced squid from the cannery's delivery truck, handing it to the shack's owner. Miller, feeling sorry for her after seeing how meticulously she kept the books, had started letting her accompany the delivery driver to earn a small commission. Sarah was wearing baggy, dirty work clothes and a cap pulled low, covering most of her face. As she heaved the crate down next to a faucet, a set of motorcycle keys flew past her landing by her rubber boots. "Hey lady, watch where you're putting that thing. You splashed dirty water all over my expensive jeans." "You got the money to pay for that." Chloe sat with her legs crossed on a plastic chair, a cigarette dangling from her lips. Sarah froze, pulling her cap down further, and tried to turn back to the truck without a word. But one of Chloe's friends stood up. "Hey, what's with the attitude? Apologize to Chloe now." He shoved Sarah's shoulder hard, causing her to stumble toward a sharp pile of oyster shells. Her cap flew off and landed on the ground. Under the bright neon lights of the shack, Sarah's pale, haggard face was fully revealed. Chloe, in the middle of exhaling smoke, stopped short. Her eyes widened, as if she'd seen a ghost. She threw her cigarette to the ground, crushed it with the heel of her boot, and strode over to grab Sarah by the collar. Well, look who it is. My dear sister-in-law hiding out in this dump. You've got some nerve. After stealing all our family's money, you run off to wash dishes here. I've got you now," Sarah stammered, trying to pry Chloe's hands off her. Chloe's friends smirked and formed a circle around them. Chloe frantically pulled her smartphone from her pocket, her fingers flying across the screen. "Don't you move! I'm calling Simon right now. He'll send people to drag you back. Let's see how tough you are then. The whole family's been tearing the state apart looking for you." Sarah said nothing. She clenched her jaw, gave Chloe a hard shove that sent her sprawling over a table of food, and ran. Amid the crash of plates, she sprinted toward the dark, muddy track behind the shack. Chloe screamed, grabbed a beer bottle, and gave chase, her drunken friends stumbling after her. Sarah ran until she reached a muddy clearing behind the cannery filled with garbage and briny puddles, where she tripped on a tree root and fell. Before she could get up, Chloe was on her, yanking her hair back. "Where do you think you're going, you crazy bitch? Give me back my mother's money or I'll tear your face to shreds right here. You think Simon will let you keep a single penny when he gets here?" Sarah wiped the mud from her cheek and looked straight into Chloe's eyes, her voice cold and firm. Chloe's hand raised to slap her stopped in midair. Her friends watching from a distance were more interested in their cigarettes than getting involved in a family dispute. Sarah staggered to her feet and brushed the wet mud off her pants. Her fear had reached its limit, replaced by an icy calm. During her years of marriage, Sarah had come to understand everyone in that house. Chloe was foolish and impulsive, but her greed was boundless. She was treated like a pawn by Eleanor and Simon, given pocket money, but never allowed near the real assets. "What nonsense are you talking about? It's our family's money, so of course my brother should get it back for my mom." "Now hand over that ledger," Chloe shouted, but her eyes were already wavering. Sarah let out a sneer, a contemptuous smile she had never dared to show her in-laws before. "Your family's money. Do you have any idea how much is in the accounts listed in that ledger, mister? Bishop gave me $15 million. You heard me, you idiot. 15 million hidden under my father-in-law's name." Chloe froze her mouth agape. $15 million was a sum her empty head couldn't even fathom. Lies. Where would my dad get that kind of money? I'm the bookkeeper. I hold the records. Do you really think your mother and brother are so fond of you? They're looking for me, not because of the money, but because they're terrified. I'll cash it all out. If you call Simon now, I guarantee you won't see a dime. Simon will take the ledger, toss you a few $1,000 to go party, and pour the rest into his construction company. You're nothing to them. Sarah's words struck Chloe like a dagger. Sarah knew she was playing a dangerous game, bluffing about the $15 million to exploit Chloe's insatiable greed. Chloe swallowed hard, her grip on Sarah's collar slowly loosening. She glanced at her friends who were casually drinking in the distance, then lowered her voice. "So what's your idea? Where's the ledger?" Sarah pushed Chloe's hand away and straightened her disheveled clothes. She took a half-step closer, staring into her volatile sister-in-law's face. "The accounts are in Mr. Bishop's name, so the bank has frozen them. I can't do anything with the ledger alone. To withdraw that $15 million, the bank said I need the original copy of his death certificate and, more importantly, a power of attorney stamped with Simon's corporate seal. That's the only way to get the money out quietly." Sarah paused, watching Chloe's expression change. Then she delivered the final blow. "Let's make a deal. You go back to Seattle, get into Simon's office, and steal the death certificate and the corporate seal from his desk. Bring them back here. I'll handle the withdrawal and I'll give you half. $7.5 million. You can take that money and go to Europe, live in luxury for the rest of your life. No more begging for handouts from your family." Greed completely paralyzed Chloe's reason. The words $7.5 million echoed in her ears, her eyes glittering like fireflies on a summer night. She licked her lips, gave Sarah one last look, and nodded. In that dark, muddy clearing, a devil's pact was made. The abusive sister-in-law had just become the framed woman's most powerful, unwitting ally. The bottom left drawer. Try that. And don't make the flashlight so bright. Someone will see the light from outside. In the cannery guard post in Astoria, Sarah's low voice came through the cheap speaker of a burner phone. Sarah stared intently at the choppy video call. On the other end, a trembling Chloe was using her phone's flashlight to scan Simon's smoke-filled office back in Seattle. The clock read exactly 2 a.m. Chloe had taken a bus back that night and used her own key to sneak in through the back door. The house was silent as a tomb. "It's locked, Sarah." Simon locked it with a key, Chloe's panicked voice whispered over the phone. She bit her lip and yanked at the steel handle with both hands. "Use the nail file in your purse. Shove it into the keyhole and twist." "Gently, you idiot, Sarah," hissed from the other end of the line. The story about the corporate seal and death certificate was a lie, a trap. Sarah was using Chloe to find the one thing Simon always kept hidden, a red, leather-bound accounts book. That was the real evidence, the book that detailed the darkest money laundering transactions, the one that would perfectly match the cryptic numbers in Mr. Bishop's ledger. Chloe, sweating profusely, jammed the metal nail file into the lock and twisted hard. With a dry click, the drawer popped open. Unfortunately, she had used too much force, knocking a crystal trophy off the desk. It shattered on the tile floor with a loud crash. In the dead of night, the sound was deafening. "Damn it! I'm screwed, Sarah," Chloe whimpered in terror. Through the phone, Sarah could clearly hear the sound of slippers shuffling on the floor below, then hurrying up the stairs from Eleanor's bedroom. "Who's there?" A woman's sharp, piercing cry echoed through the house. "Hide in the closet now, and shut up, don't even breathe," Sarah commanded coldly, quickly muting her microphone so her voice wouldn't carry. The screen shook violently as Chloe scrambled into a dusty plywood closet that smelled of mothballs, pulling the door almost completely shut, leaving only a tiny crack. The office door was kicked open, and the blinding fluorescent light flooded in. Through the narrow view from Chloe's phone, hidden amongst the clothes, Sarah could see the hem of Eleanor's purple silk pajamas pacing back and forth. But Eleanor wasn't alone. A man in sharp black dress shoes followed her in. "Damn it, Eleanor, it was just the wind knocking over the trophy. Why are you making such a scene thinking someone broke in? You're going to give me a heart attack." The man's voice was deep, gravelly, and irritated. Sarah pressed her ear to the phone's speaker. The voice was unfamiliar. It wasn't Simon, and it wasn't one of the thugs who had come to the wake. Eleanor sighed and slapped her thigh. "Calm down, Mr. Blackwood. We can't be too careful. That damned Sarah Parker vanished with Walter's ledger, and Simons had his men searching every terminal, but they still can't find her. Walter may be dead, but our lives are still in her hands. In the darkness of the closet, Chloe bit down on her hand so hard she drew blood. The man Eleanor had just called Mr. Blackwood. Chloe had vaguely heard the name during her parents' fights as a child, but she had never seen his face. "You useless woman," Blackwood snarled. A sharp crack echoed as his hand struck Eleanor's cheek. She stumbled and fell, whimpering in pain but not daring to talk back. "I told you months ago to handle it cleanly. Put some of that odorless pesticide in his food. But no, you had to play the doting wife and give him an overdose so he'd die suddenly. And look where it got you." The old man passed the ledger to his daughter-in-law right before he croaked. "If that ledger gets to the police, my entire waste smuggling route and Simon's Shell Company are finished." Blackwood strode over and grabbed a handful of Eleanor's disheveled hair, yanking her head back. In Astoria, Sarah froze. The ugliest secret of that vile family was being peeled back layer by layer in the dead of night. The real storm was just beginning to break over their fates. "You stupid woman. How could you let that old fool secretly record every move Simon and I made for the last few years?" Vince Blackwood's rough voice came through the crackling speaker of Sarah's phone as she huddled in the dark guard post. Sarah held her breath, clutching the phone as if her life depended on it. On the other end, Chloe was drenched in a cold sweat inside the mothball-scented closet. Through the tiny crack in the door, the dim light was enough for both of them to witness the horrific scene unfolding. Eleanor scrambled up from the floor, one hand covering her swelling cheek, her hair a mess. The dignified, pious woman she pretended to be was gone. How was I supposed to know he was faking being paralyzed? Faking that he couldn't even speak. The doctor said he couldn't even hold chopsticks. Who would have thought he was hiding that ledger under his wheelchair cushion, writing in it whenever I left the room? And you, Mr. Blackwood, why haven't you sent your men to help? Do you know how much money Simon has spent trying to find that bitch? Blackwood spat on the floor, tapping it impatiently with the toe of his shiny black shoe. "My men are busy hiding the smuggled waste down at the port. If we make a move now, the cops will be all over us. For 30 years I've looked after you and your son. I made Simon the president of that shell company, gave you a way to launder the money, and you let the most damning evidence fall right into your daughter-in-law's hands. If she takes that ledger to the authorities, you, me, and our bastard son will all end up in prison." On the other end of the line, Sarah was just as stunned. Our bastard son. Blackwood's words were a hammer blow to her fragmented memories of her in-laws. Simon wasn't Walter Bishop's biological son. The sordid affair between Eleanor and this waste-smuggling kingpin had started 3 decades ago. "Keep your voice down," Eleanor hissed, glancing around the empty office. "Walter found out Simon wasn't his blood last Christmas. The old bastard was secretly meeting with a lawyer to change his will, disinherit us, and leave the entire seafood company to Chloe. If I hadn't switched his blood pressure pills with something that would induce a massive heart attack, we'd be out on the street right now. You think I wanted to be known as a woman who killed her husband?" The devastating secret was out. All the pieces fell into place: Walter's miserable death, Eleanor and Simon's cold cleanup of the scene, and their relentless pursuit of Sarah. It wasn't just because she had the ledger detailing their money laundering. They had killed him to sever the connection to Simon's true parentage. The truth was far more horrifying than Sarah had ever imagined. Inside the closet, the air was suffocating. Chloe couldn't breathe. The realization that her own mother and brother were cold-blooded murderers sent a wave of terror through her. A warm, foul-smelling liquid slowly soaked her underwear and trickled down her trembling legs. She had wet herself in fear. Shaking uncontrollably, Chloe tried to shrink deeper into the corner of the closet away from the sliver of light, but in her clumsy panic, her elbow knocked hard against the wooden wall. Thump! It was a small sound, but in the silence of the 3 a.m. office, it sounded like a thunderclap. Eleanor jumped, shrinking behind Blackwood. Blackwood narrowed his eyes, staring directly at the closed closet in the corner. Without a word, he pulled a glittering metal object from his waistband. His steps were slow, deliberate, as he scraped the heels of his shoes on the tile floor, creating an ominous sound. "Who's in there? Come out!" Blackwood growled, his voice like a predator stalking its prey. Chloe clamped her hands over her ears, tears streaming down her face. On the other end of the line, Sarah saw the shaky screen and knew it was over. "Run, Chloe, kick the door open and run." Sarah screamed into the phone, but it was too late. Blackwood's rough hand yanked the closet door open and the bright light fell directly on Chloe's deathly pale face. Seeing that it was his own daughter in the closet, Blackwood hesitated for a split second. That brief pause was all Chloe needed. Her survival instinct kicking in, she let out a piercing scream and kicked Blackwood with all her might in the stomach. The older man lost his balance and stumbled backward. Without a second thought, Chloe bolted, shoving her mother, who was blocking the doorway, out of the way. She ran blindly down the stairs and disappeared into the rainy darkness outside. "Get her!" She heard everything. Blackwood's furious roar echoed from upstairs. Chloe kicked open the back door and plunged into the muddy alley, melting into the pitch-black night. On Sarah's end, the phone screen spun wildly and then went black with a crack. Chloe had dropped it as she fled. The last thing Sarah heard was the sound of the screen shattering. The signal was gone. Sarah's hand went limp, and the phone slipped from her grasp, thudding onto the wooden floor. She slumped into a corner of the guard post, her clothes soaked with sweat. Chloe had been discovered. They would immediately check her broken phone's call history or try to recover the data. Blackwood was a seasoned criminal. It wouldn't take him long to trace the unknown number to a cell tower in Astoria. The wolf pack had caught the scent of blood. They would be coming for this dilapidated cannery. For Sarah, there was nowhere left to run. The countdown to a life-or-death confrontation had begun. At first light, Sarah rushed to find Miller. A thick, salty fog rolled in from the sea, blanketing everything up to her waist. Miller was inspecting the barrels in the outdoor yard. Seeing Sarah's deathly pale face, he stopped what he was doing and pulled a blackened corncob pipe from his belt. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Miller sat down on a mossy brick step, struck a match and lit his pipe, taking a long puff. Sarah didn't hesitate. She swallowed hard and told him everything she had seen and heard on the video call last night. Walter's murder, the incriminating ledger, Simon's true parentage, and most importantly, the name of the man pulling all the strings. His name is Blackwood. Eleanor called him Mr. Blackwood. He runs a large-scale industrial waste smuggling operation out of the port. As Sarah finished speaking, Miller, who had been exhaling a cloud of smoke, froze. His eyes went blank for a moment, then darkened. His rough hands trembled, gripping the pipe so tightly his knuckles turned white. "His name is Blackwood, smuggles waste in Seattle. Got a long scar on his neck, runs all the way down to his shoulder." Sarah searched her memory. In the blurry image from the phone last night, she had vaguely seen a large centipede-like scar across Blackwood's neck when his shirt was open. She nodded firmly. Miller slammed his pipe against the brick, sending sparks flying. His eyes were bloodshot, and his weathered face contorted with a deep, suppressed hatred. "What goes around comes around. It really does. There's justice in this world, after all. No way a monster like that gets to live happily ever after." Miller's voice was hoarse and cracked. He stared out at the muddy flats where crabs scurried for cover as the tide rolled in. 15 years ago, I had the biggest fishing fleet in Seattle. Blackwood. He was just a small-time broker back then, buying up scrap from shipwrecks. One day, we were out at sea, and the Coast Guard boarded us. They found a few dozen kilos of illegal drugs in the ice hold. I swore on my life I was innocent, but nobody believed me. The man who signed off on the cargo manifest was Blackwood. I did 3 years in prison for a crime I didn't commit. My wife and kids left with nothing, abandoned me, and disappeared. When I got out, I drifted all the way down here to Astoria, worked odd jobs until I scraped enough together to buy this old cannery and hide from the world. Miller turned to Sarah. His eyes no longer held the indifference of their first meeting, but a sense of kinship of two people pushed to the edge. "Your father-in-law, Mr. Bishop. He once bought me a meal when I was starving at the bus station years ago. I owe him. Now he's been murdered, and it's all tied up with my lifelong enemy. You don't have to run anymore, kid. Running from that wolf pack won't solve anything. I'll help you. We'll set a trap and make those bastards confess to everything." Tears streamed down Sarah's face. In this dark, fish-stinking coastal town, she had finally found an ally and a place to make her stand. For 2 weeks, there was no news. In Seattle, Simon paced his empty, cavernous house like a caged animal. Loan sharks had started showing up, splashing red paint and filth on his front door. Blackwood's smuggling operation had been put on hold after a tip-off to the police, and the flow of money to Simon had dried up. He was more desperate for cash than ever, to maintain the facade of a successful businessman and pay off his debts. In the windy guard post in Astoria, Sarah calmly borrowed Miller's phone and made a call to an old acquaintance, a warehouse manager at the Port of Seattle. He was a man who had accepted bribes from her several times when she was processing customs documents. Drowning in gambling debts, he was the kind of man who would do anything for money. "I need you to create a perfect set of forged shipping documents," she said. "The cargo is 10 containers of industrial-grade copper scrap salvaged from old electrical wiring. It's worth about $1.5 million. I need customs clearances, quality certificates, bills of lading, all with official red stamps. How much will it cost? I'll wire you half up front. You'll get the other half in cash when I pick them up. The money Sarah had carefully saved over the years was just enough to pull this off. A bookkeeper's nature is meticulous. Sarah instructed the manager to falsify the technical specs and create a perfect loophole in the customs paperwork, making it look as though the cargo was tied up due to a procedural issue and needed to be sold off quickly at a third of its market value. Once the forged documents were completed and mailed to Astoria, Sarah moved to the second phase. She knew all of Simon's key contacts in the scrap industry. She had the warehouse manager spread a rumor there was a fantastic deal on some high-grade material tied up at the port, and they needed a buyer who could pay the full amount in cash within 3 days. The deal promised a profit of 2 to 3 times the investment upon resale to a steel refinery. This juicy rumor spread through the network of brokers, and in the most natural way reached Simon's ears. For a man being strangled by debt collectors, a deal promising such a massive profit was a lifeline from heaven. Sarah knew her husband was clueless about paperwork. He had always relied on her for that. He only understood the bottom line. His insatiable greed and desperate situation would completely cloud his judgment. Miller sat on the doorstep, weaving a fishing net as he watched Sarah carefully place the forged documents into an envelope. You think that Simon will fall for it that easily? The brokers around him are seasoned pros. If they figure out the papers are fake, all this will be for nothing. Sarah sealed the envelope and gave a cold smirk. The timid, submissive woman she once was had vanished. The brokers won't know. I used the exact same loopholes in the smuggling procedures they use all the time. Simon is thirsty right now. He'll want this deal all to himself, so he won't tell Blackwood. He'll find a way to mortgage the house to come up with the $1.5 million in cash. The bait is set. Now we just have to wait for the fish to swim into the trap and start eating each other. Mom, look at this. $1.5 million in cash within 3 days. If we flip it to the refinery in a week, we'll clear at least $500,000 in profit. This is the opportunity of a lifetime to get us out of debt. Simon slammed a thick stack of documents onto the glass coffee table. His eyes were bloodshot from sleepless nights dealing with debt collectors. The living room was thick with cigarette smoke. Eleanor cautiously picked up the shipping manifests. The official customs seals and the crisp stamps on the bills of lading guaranteeing the quality of the industrial copper scrap dazzled her. A lifelong opportunist, the prospect of such a huge profit reawakened her greed, overriding her usual caution. But the memory of Walter's death and Sarah's disappearance with the damning ledger still gnawed at her. But where are we going to get that kind of money right now? Blackwood's business is on hold. The cops are sniffing around his warehouses, so the cash flow has stopped. I asked him for a loan yesterday, and he cursed me out. Simon flicked his cigarette ash on the floor and leaned forward, his voice low and determined. We can't wait for Blackwood. I'm running this deal through my own broker without him. Think about it, Mom. For years we've been his puppets laundering his money for scraps. This house is ours. Here's my plan. You get the deeds for the seafood company and this house. We'll call up those loan sharks and get a short-term high-interest loan. They'll appraise the properties for at least $1.6 million. The interest is steep, but after this score we can pay it off and disappear. Leave Blackwood and all his problems behind. Eleanor was hesitant. Mortgaging everything they owned to loan sharks was an enormous risk. If anything went wrong, they would be on the street. She glanced at Walter's portrait on the memorial, clasped her hands in a mock prayer, then gritted her teeth and nodded. Just as they were preparing to call the loan sharks, Blackwood showed up unannounced. The old fox's suspicious nature had picked up on something odd in Simon's anxious behavior. He snatched the documents from Simon's hand and examined them page by page under the fluorescent light. He creased the edge of the paper and rubbed the red seal with his thumb. Whose shipment is this? Where did you hear about it? Blackwood's voice was cold and heavy. Simon broke into a cold sweat but feigned nonchalance, spinning a perfect story about a port warehouse manager desperate to offload unclaimed goods to pay off gambling debts. Blackwood was a master smuggler himself, and because of that, he was all too familiar with the loopholes in the law. The forged documents Sarah had created were so sophisticated that they mirrored the exact methods Blackwood himself used. Faced with such a sweet deal, especially when his own funds were tied up, Blackwood's greed surged. Instead of being suspicious, he decided he wanted in. He demanded half of the deal in exchange for handling the logistics of getting the cargo out of the port. Sarah's trap was more perfect than she could have imagined. The three most cunning and ruthless people, driven by greed and desperation, had just willingly walked into an unwinnable gamble, betting their entire fortune on a shipment that didn't exist. The sky over Astoria was gray, with dark clouds carrying the chill of a coming storm. A woman with bleeding, blistered feet walked along the muddy track leading from the highway to Miller's cannery. Her once fashionable clothes were torn and caked with mud, her hair matted and tangled, and she reeked of days spent on the street. It was Chloe. After that terrifying night when she fled her family home, she had been living through the darkest days of her life. Terrified that Blackwood would have her killed to silence her, she couldn't go home. Her so-called friends had kicked her to the curb the moment her money ran out. Pushed to the edge and starving, her only option was to crawl back to the one person she had so viciously abused, her sister-in-law. Sarah was in the yard recording the anchovy inventory when she saw Chloe's staggering figure. She wasn't surprised. She knew human nature all too well. Sarah tossed Chloe a set of workers' clothes and pointed to the communal spigot. "Go wash off that mud. Then go to the kitchen and eat whatever's left. After that, you can help the women sorting the mackerel. No one gets a free ride here." Chloe swallowed hard, tears welling up as she looked at the meager meal of rice-pickled vegetables and a few salty dried fish. She was used to fine clothes and gourmet food. Now she had to chew on cold, hard rice amidst the overwhelming stench of the cannery. The harder the work, the more resentment festered in Chloe's heart. As she squatted in a pile of slimy seaweed-sorting fish, she cursed her fate, gagging several times from the smell. That night, forced to sleep in a crowded shack with sweaty, snoring workers, the trader's fickle nature resurfaced. Chloe couldn't accept a life of hiding here. She remembered Blackwood's words that night, that they had to find Sarah and get the ledger back. If she told Simon where Sarah was, he would surely give her a huge reward. She could take the money and flee to Thailand or Cambodia, escaping Blackwood's reach. The thought quickly turned into action. In the middle of the night, while everyone was asleep, Chloe tiptoed out of the shack and stole a worker's old phone that was charging in a corner. She crept down to the riverbank, where the sound of waves crashing against the rocks would cover any noise. With trembling hands, she dialed a familiar number. It rang for a long time before someone answered. "Hello, who is this? What do you want at this hour?" Simon's drunken voice slurred through the phone. "Simon, it's me, Chloe. Don't hang up. I know where that bitch Sarah is hiding. She's at a cannery in Astoria with Walter's ledger." There was a moment of silence on the other end, then the sound of someone scrambling out of bed. Simon's voice was suddenly wide awake. "Are you serious? Give me the address. Now." Chloe smirked, pushing her tangled hair back. "You think I'm an idiot, Simon. Wire $500,000 to my offshore account. And book me a one-way ticket from SeaTac to Bangkok. Then I'll text you the exact address. Otherwise, you can keep looking for a needle in a haystack. Sarah is smarter than you think. She's planning on taking that ledger to the feds." The dirty deal between siblings was struck in the darkness. Simon agreed, taking a portion of the money he had borrowed from the loan sharks to pay off his own sister. As soon as she received the notification that the money was in her account, Chloe let out a triumphant laugh, sent a short text message, and then threw the worker's phone into the murky river. She disappeared into the night, abandoning the sister-in-law who had shown her mercy to face the brutal wrath that was about to descend. A fierce wind howled over the tin roof of Miller's cannery. The tide was unusually high that night, and dark brackish water from the overflowing drains had risen to their calves, carrying debris across the yard. The workers had gone home early to escape the flooding, leaving only Sarah and Miller to move bags of salt to higher ground. The yard was dark, and the sound of sloshing water mixed with the pouring rain was eerie. Suddenly, a pair of blinding headlights cut through the darkness from the dirt road, illuminating the rusted cannery. 3 pickup trucks with heavy-duty grills screeched to a halt at the edge of the flooded yard. The doors flew open, and a dozen menacing men in cheap raincoats armed with crowbars and baseball bats jumped out, churning the muddy water. Simon got out of the lead truck. He wore no raincoat, letting the heavy drops splatter on his face. He looked haggard, his eyes dark and sunken, but they burned with a murderous rage. Before committing to the fake scrap metal deal, he had brought the loan sharks' enforcers to settle the score with Sarah once and for all. "Find her. Search every damn corner of this place," Simon roared. The thugs swarmed the cannery, smashing everything in their path. Plastic tubs shattered and half-cured fish spilled out, mixing with the floodwater to create a suffocating stench. Sarah and Miller were slowly cornered in an old wooden warehouse near the drainage canal. It was where the oldest fermentation barrels were kept, and the space was cramped and dark. Miller gripped a rusty crowbar standing protectively in front of Sarah. The plywood warehouse door was kicked open. Simon entered, a steel pipe in his hand. His eyes scanned the gaps between the giant barrels, finally landing on the dark corner where Sarah was hiding. "You goddamn bitch. You really have some nerve running to this stinking hellhole." Do you know how much money I spent looking for you? Hand over Walter's ledger and I might let you live. Otherwise, I'll tear you to pieces and feed you to the fish tonight. Simon slammed the pipe against a wooden barrel. His men stood at the door, blocking any escape. Sarah wasn't afraid. She gave a faint, mocking smile, reached into her pocket, and pressed a button on a small remote. A crackling sound came from a modified, portable speaker that Miller had hidden in the warehouse rafters, and then a recording began to play. The sound was distorted, but every word cut through the tense air. I told you months ago to handle it cleanly. Put some of that odorless pesticide in his food. Blackwood's deep, cruel voice echoed through the small space. Simon froze the steel pipe in his hand, stopping mid-swing. The thugs looked at each other confused. They were hired to collect debts, not get involved in their employer's murderous family drama. The recording continued, dragging the dirtiest secrets out into the rainy night. My entire waste smuggling route and Simon's shell company are finished. And then the most devastating line in Eleanor's sharp, piercing voice struck Simon's eardrums. Walter found out Simon wasn't his blood last Christmas. If I hadn't switched his blood pressure pills, we'd be out on the street right now. Simon's body went rigid, his eyes wide and bloodshot. The brutal truth hit him like a hammer, shattering the false pride he had carried his whole life as the family's eldest son. The steel pipe clattered from his hand, splashing into the muddy, fishy water. He staggered back, clutching his head and mumbling incoherently. No, it's a lie. You faked the voices to trick me. Simon howled like a wounded animal, grabbing a nearby plastic tub and smashing it against the wooden wall. Everything he had built, his title as a business owner, his power in the Seattle house, his legal right to inherit Walter Bishop's fortune, was all a fraud. He was nothing but the dirty product of a cheap affair, a tool used to launder black money. His greatest enemies weren't the woman standing before him, but his own pious mother, and the man who had always clapped him on the shoulder and called him son. The thugs began to back away. Their leader took a long drag from his cigarette and spat. This family's shit is too deep. I'm out. Murder, robbery. If we get caught up in this, we'll rot in prison. We'll talk about my payment later. Let's go, boys. The thugs whistled to each other, retreated to their trucks, and drove off, leaving the suffocating air of crime behind. The warehouse was silent, except for the sound of the sloshing water. While Simon was on his knees, broken and sobbing in a dirty puddle, Sarah signaled to Miller. The two of them slipped quietly through a gap between two massive barrels. At the back of the warehouse was an underground drainage pipe that led directly to the river. The high tide had filled it almost to the top with dark, murky water. Without hesitation, Sarah and Miller plunged into the cold water. They held their breath and swam through the oyster-encrusted tunnel. The foul smell was nauseating, but the will to live overpowered all fear. They emerged in a dense patch of reeds and escaped into the pitch-black Astoria night, leaving the ruined cannery behind. Inside the empty warehouse, Simon's face was buried in the mud. Tears, snot, and rainwater mixed on his face. He pounded the muddy floor with his fists. The $1.5 million trap Sarah had set was still waiting for him. Tomorrow the loan sharks would be at his door to take his house. Simon's world had officially come crashing down. You goddamn bitch. Get down here, Simon screamed, kicking the second-floor bedroom door again. The door ripped from its hinges and crashed to the floor. He stormed into the room, and before Eleanor could process what was happening, he grabbed a fistful of her hair and dragged her from the plush bed onto the cold tile. Eleanor let out a wretched scream, clawing at Simon's arm. Are you insane? Simon, I'm your mother. What's gotten into you? You can't hit your mother. Mother, you think I didn't know you had an affair with that bastard? Blackwood cheated on Walter, and I'm the bastard son you produced. You killed him and tried to pin it on Sarah. You're the one who pushed me into this hell. Simon roared, spitting on the floor next to Eleanor's face. His eyes were bloodshot demonic. For years, he had held his head high, proud to be the legitimate heir. Now it was all garbage. He had lost his wife, his father, and even his own identity. Eleanor's face went white when she heard Blackwood's name and the truth about Walter's death. She trembled, grabbing at Simon's legs as she knelt on the floor, her face a mess of tears and smeared makeup. Simon, listen to me. I did it all for you to protect this house. Walter found out about your birth and was changing the will to kick us out. I had no other choice, son. Heavy footsteps came up the stairs. Blackwood appeared at the top, his shirt unbuttoned, his face a cold mask. He had just gotten word from his men at the port. The $1.5 million shipment of scrap metal that Simon had bought was a complete fraud. The customs documents, the shipping manifests, all expertly forged. The money had been paid to the middleman, who had vanished without a trace. Seeing Blackwood, Simon let go of Eleanor and lunged at the old gangster, grabbing him by the collar. You too. You manipulated my mother and used me to launder your dirty money. Give me my $1.5 million back. Give me back my house and my company. Blackwood shoved Simon off him and delivered a crushing punch to his face. Simon staggered back his head, hitting the banister. Blood poured from his nose. Blackwood dusted off his hands, his voice devoid of any human warmth. The money was in your hands. You were stupid enough to throw it away, so you deal with the consequences. I may be your father, but if you don't have the balls to make it in this world, you deserve to die. My organization is in trouble. I don't have time to clean up your messes. With that, Blackwood turned and walked back downstairs, ignoring Eleanor's heartbroken sobs and the murderous rage in his bastard son's eyes. In this family built on lies and greed, disaster had struck, and the basest survival instincts had taken over. They were ready to tear each other to bloody pieces to survive. Break down that damn door. Where's Simon Bishop? Come out and pay what you owe. The deafening sound of crowbars and steel pipes smashing against the metal roll-up door of the Bishop Fisheries warehouse echoed through the neighborhood. The sky was dark, with storm clouds gathering. Dozens of tattooed men, armed and dangerous, had surrounded the property. The loan sharks they worked for showed no mercy. Inside the dark, powerless house, a terrified Eleanor stuffed the last of her gold rings and necklaces into the pocket of her robe. She tried to flee through the back door but ran straight into a shadowy figure blocking her path. It was Blackwood. He twisted her arm behind her back and she screamed. His rough hands rummaged through her clothes, pulling out the wad of jewelry. Give me that. I need cash to get to Cambodia. You're old. You can stay here and face the music, he grunted. You monster, give it back. How could you betray me like this? After I sacrificed 30 years for you. Eleanor shrieked, clinging to Blackwood's leg. Without a word, he kicked her brutally in the chest. She slammed against the wall and passed out. He stuffed the jewelry into his pocket, pulled his hat down low, and disappeared into the overgrown alley behind the house, leaving his mistress and son to their fates. The front door burst open, and the loan sharks swarmed in like hungry locusts. They dragged Simon out from under his bed and threw him into the middle of the living room. Where's my money? $1.5 million principal plus $200,000 in interest. Now, their leader snarled. Simon knelt on the floor shaking, unable to speak clearly. I was scammed. The cargo was fake. It's all gone. I'll sell the machinery at the plant to pay you back. Just give me some time. Time. You can pay with your life. I have the deeds to this house and the plant. They're mine now. Break his leg. Let this be an example of what happens to people who don't pay. At the command, two burly men pinned Simon to the floor. One of them swung a rusty steel pipe with all his might, bringing it down on Simon's shin. A sickening crack echoed through the room. Simon let out an agonized scream and fainted in a pool of his own blood. They dragged him out like a sack of trash and tossed him onto the rain-soaked street. Eleanor came to her hair wild, her clothes torn, and stumbled outside. She wailed, begging the loan sharks for mercy, but was met with merciless kicks. The family's possessions were thrown out into the yard. The woman who once wore fine robes and preached morality while hiding a heart of stone was now a penniless beggar cradling her crippled son and screaming in the Seattle rain. Neighbors gathered to watch, but no one intervened. They just shook their heads and clicked their tongues. The price for a life of depravity was never cheap. You want to die, you little tramp? How dare you mess with my husband? I'm gonna tear that pretty little face of yours to shreds. A sharp curse echoed through a corner of the Astoria bus terminal, thick with the smell of diesel and Orin. Before Chloe could react, a group of large, angry-looking women descended on her, yanking her back by her hair. After betraying Sarah and fleeing the cannery, Chloe had ended up drifting around the bus station, falling in with pimps who supplied women to long-haul truck drivers. Lazy and materialistic by nature, she quickly fell into selling her body to survive. But her habit of seducing men with money was her undoing. She had tried to scam the owner of a wholesale seafood company, whose wife was known as the toughest woman on the coast. I'm sorry I didn't know he was married. Please just let me go. Chloe screamed and begged, but the slaps kept coming. In front of a crowd of onlookers, the women ripped off her t-shirt, leaving her to cower and cover her bare chest. The lead woman pulled a pair of electric clippers from her purse. A horrifying buzzing sound filled the air. She slammed Chloe's head against the hot asphalt and shaved a long, ragged strip from the crown of her head to the nape of her neck. Chloe's once curly hair, her pride and joy, fell in clumps to the dirty ground. She struggled and wailed in despair, her half-shaved head bleeding. It didn't end there. Another woman brought over a stinking bucket of fish guts mixed with black motor oil. Pour it on her. Let's see if this smell can cover up the stench of a husband-stealing whore. The bucket was dumped over Chloe's head. The sticky, foul liquid clung to her skin, getting in her eyes and mouth, causing her to vomit. People gathered, pointing, laughing, and taking pictures, but no one stepped in to help. After the brutal assault, Chloe was kicked out by her pimp for bringing trouble. With no ID, no money, and a grotesque, stinking appearance, she was chased away like a stray dog wherever she went. To buy a few pieces of bread, Chloe had to rummage through the muddy fish market for plastic bottles and cans. At night, she crawled under an old fish stall, pulling a torn tarp over herself, shivering in the bone-chilling sea wind. Her dreams of a luxurious life were shattered. Chloe was paying the price for her laziness and betrayal with a life worse than a street dog's. Think carefully, Sarah. If you submit this, you're severing all ties with that family. You're burning the whole thing to the ground. Miller took a long drag from his cigarette in the hallway of the King County Sheriff's Office. Sarah clutched a clear plastic evidence bag to her chest. Inside were Walter Bishop's ledger and the meticulously organized proof of the money laundering operation she had compiled. I have no attachments left to that family, Miller. They pushed me to the brink of death and murdered Mr. Bishop in his bed. Their crimes must be punished. I'm doing this not just to clear my name, but for everyone they've harmed, including you. Her voice was unnaturally calm. The submissive, timid daughter-in-law was gone. In her place stood a strong, resilient woman forged in the fires of betrayal. The evidence was submitted directly to the Economic Crimes Unit. The proof was so overwhelming, with detailed dates and transactions, that a special task force was immediately formed. The money laundering and waste smuggling ring fronted by Simon's Construction Company and run by Blackwood was dismantled from the roots up. Late that afternoon on the bus ride back to Astoria, Sarah and Miller passed through a downtown park. The sun was setting over the lake and leaves skittered across the path. Suddenly, Sarah stopped walking. In a corner by the park fence, a man in ragged clothes sat on a piece of cardboard. His right leg, encased in a filthy cast, was stretched out stiffly. Beside him, a torn baseball cap sat on the ground, begging for change. It was her husband, Simon, the man who once dressed in sharp suits and slicked back hair, who used to yell at her for the smallest things. Now, he was as broken and pathetic as a piece of rotting wood. He kept his head down, bowing repeatedly to the joggers who passed by. As if sensing her presence, Simon looked up. His jaw dropped. The hand he had extended for money began to shake violently, and he quickly pulled it back. Shame, regret, and a world of pain rose in his throat, but he couldn't speak. He quickly pulled his grimy cap low, hiding his face, and shrank back into the shadows like a bug afraid of the light. Sarah didn't shed a tear. She didn't approach him to curse or mock him. She simply looked at the crippled man, with the detached gaze of a stranger passing a pile of trash on the street. All her resentment was gone. The wheel of karma had mercilessly crushed those with hearts of beasts. Sarah turned and walked away with Miller, her steps long and firm toward the bus station, leaving the dark, closed chapter of her past behind her forever. I don't care what kind of boat it is. Put me in the fish. Stuff me in a barrel. I don't care. I have to get out of this country tonight. Blackwood grabbed the collar of a burly boat captain, who was smoking a cigarette on a pier in Elliott Bay. The night wind whipped across the water, carrying the smell of salt and diesel. The powerful crime boss was gone. His shirt was torn, his face was smeared with dirt, and in one hand he clutched a cloth bundle containing the jewelry he had stolen from Eleanor. The captain shoved Blackwood's hand away and spat into a puddle on the dock. "What's the rush?" "You pay, I take you. 2 gold bars for a trip out to international waters. A bigger boat will pick you up from a buoy. Nobody here's got time for your problems." Blackwood gritted his teeth, unwrapped the bundle, and tossed 2 heavy gold bars to the young man. Since the money laundering ring had been exposed, the higher-ups in the organization had moved quickly to cut their losses. Blackwood was now a wanted man, a disposable pawn. He knew if the police caught him and he talked his former associates would not be merciful. An unspoken order had been put out on him in the underworld. His only way out was to flee by sea. Suddenly, from the dark pine trees at the end of the dirt path leading to the pier, 3 powerful flashlight beams pinned Blackwood in their glare. The captain, sensing trouble, quickly backed away, rowing his small boat into the darkness between the larger docked ships. "There he is!" Get him, a rough voice shouted. Blackwood realized with a jolt of terror that the men running toward him were enforcers sent by his old partners. Without a second to think, he clutched his bundle of gold and ran toward a jagged rock outcropping jutting into the sea. The sky was pitch black, and waves crashed against the cliffs, sending up plumes of white spray. Blackwood scrambled over the slippery, moss-covered rocks, gasping for breath. His pursuers were right behind him, their heavy footsteps and the scrape of machetes against rock sending his heart into a frenzy. "It's a dead end, you bastard. You gonna jump and be shark food?" the lead thug roared, brandishing a shining blade. Blackwood was at the edge of the cliff. Below him, the angry waves churned. In his extreme terror, the toe of his slippery dress shoe caught on a wet rock and he lost his footing. He flailed his arms, grasping at empty air. A blood-curdling scream tore through the night as his heavy body plunged from the cliff into the swirling water dozens of feet below. The sickening sound of his body hitting the sharp rocks was swallowed by the roar of the sea. The bundle of gold slipped from his grasp and scattered into the deep. The pursuers stood at the edge, shining their flashlights down, but all they saw was a brief surge of red-tinged foam before it was swept away by the powerful waves, leaving no trace. The man who had committed countless evil deeds was consumed by the sea, leaving not even a body behind. "Go away, Walter, don't haunt me." "I didn't kill you. It was Blackwood. He made me do it." Eleanor cowered in a dark corner under a Seattle overpass, waving her arms at an unseen ghost. The pile of garbage she used as a bed reeked. A month after the disaster, the woman who had once dressed in fine robes and preached morality was a walking corpse. Her graying hair was matted with filth, her clothes were rags, and her skin was a dry, ashen gray. The shock of losing everything, being abandoned and beaten by her lover, and watching her crippled son get arrested, had completely shattered her sanity. She was mad, surviving on scraps of bread thrown to her by strangers and whatever she could find in trash cans. The slow crunch of feet on gravel approached. Sarah stood a few feet away from her. She wore a simple blue shirt, her hair tied back, her face devoid of emotion. In her hands, she held a white styrofoam container, still warm. Hearing the sound, Eleanor looked up with dull, clouded eyes. Recognizing the face of the daughter-in-law she had despised, abused, and driven to a dead end, she shrieked and scrambled deeper into her corner. "A ghost! You're a ghost! You've come to take my life! Go away!" Eleanor screamed, throwing a plastic bottle at Sarah, but it fell harmlessly at her feet. Sarah didn't flinch or move closer. Her eyes swept over her mother-in-law's pathetic state. She remembered the cold look on her face as she flushed Walter's pills, the venomous words she had spat at her. The judgment of the law was no longer necessary. Her own guilty conscience and the inescapable hand of karma had delivered the cruelest sentence. Sarah bent down and placed the warm container of BBQ ribs and cornbread on the dusty ground. "I'm not a ghost. I'm very much alive." Her voice was firm and cold. "I didn't come here to mock you. There's no point in kicking someone who's already down, especially since you're now living a life worse than any stray animal. I bought this for you. Consider it the final act of justice for the years I spent in your house." Sarah straightened up her hands in her pockets. Her gaze pierced through Eleanor's terrified eyes. "Don't you dare think about dying. You eat this. You keep that wretched life of yours going. Live and spend every single day chewing on the bitter reality of karma. Live and taste what it feels like to be an outcast at the bottom of society, the same fate you once forced on others. Don't you even dream of an easy escape." With that, Sarah turned her back and walked away. Her thin but resolute figure disappeared under the yellow glow of the streetlights. Left behind, Eleanor crawled over and clutched the container, dirty tears streaming down her face. Famished, she began stuffing the food into her mouth, sobbing as she chewed her throat so tight she could only make choked, incoherent sounds. The defendant, Simon Bishop, will rise and hear the verdict. The judge's deep, authoritative voice echoed through the spacious courtroom. The sharp crack of the gavel followed. Simon, leaning on a crutch, struggled to his feet. His hands bound in cold steel handcuffs rested on the railing of the defendant's box. He was no longer the well-dressed boss who partied all night. He looked 10 years older, and the baggy striped prison jumpsuit only emphasized his misery. The leg broken by the loan sharks had healed poorly, leaving him with a permanent pronounced limp. The charges of money laundering, receiving stolen property, and accessory to murder had all been proven. Simon trembled as he looked toward the family section of the gallery. The wooden benches were empty and cold. There was no Eleanor now, a madwoman on the streets. No Chloe, who had disappeared after her brutal public humiliation in Astoria. The brothers who had once slapped him on the back had vanished like smoke, but in the last row near the exit, Simon saw a familiar face. Sarah sat there as serene as an autumn lake. She wore a simple white shirt and a thin cardigan, her calm eyes fixed on the judge. As a party to the case, the one who had pulled back the curtain on this family's horrific secrets, she was there to see it through. The moment their eyes met, Simon felt as if a hand had squeezed his heart. His mouth fell open, and tears streamed down his haggard face. "Sarah, I was wrong. I'm sorry." 1,000 times I'm sorry, he sobbed, his broken voice echoing in the silent courtroom. The late apology dissipated into the air. He wept for his own stupidity, for the family destroyed by greed and lies, and for the free life that was about to be buried behind bars. The judge read the sentence. For his numerous crimes, Simon was sentenced to 15 years in prison. His remaining assets were to be seized to compensate the victims of the smuggling ring. Listening to the verdict, Sarah felt no ripple of emotion. Not satisfaction, not pity. As the bailiffs came to lead Simon away, she quietly stood up and packed her things. She walked out of the courtroom and into the bright Seattle sunshine, letting her ex-husband's remorseful cries fade into the dark past. A sea breeze swept across the vast sandy dunes of the Oregon coast, leaving a mournful sound in its wake. Sarah walked across the hot sand carrying a small plastic basket. Sweat trickled down her temples. She had come back to clean Walter's grave and offer her respects. The grave was tucked away behind the dunes, a quiet place far from the noise of the world. She stopped in front of a simple concrete marker and used her hat to brush away the fine sand that had collected on it. Sarah arranged a few fresh pieces of fruit and lit 3 sticks of incense, placing them carefully in a small holder. A thin wisp of white smoke curled up toward the blue sky. Sarah knelt on a small mat, her hands clasped before her. Rest in peace, Walter. The wind here is cold, but at least you no longer have to endure the lies and deceit. Her voice was a soft whisper carried on the wind. Because of the ledger you put in my hand that night, everything has come to light. Those who sowed the wind have reaped the whirlwind. Blackwood is dead, lost at sea. Simon is paying for his crimes in prison, and Eleanor is living a fate worse than death on the streets. The law has judged them, and karma has spared no one. I've cleared my name, too. I'm no longer the woman who stole money and ran off with another man. Sarah closed her eyes, and a single hot tear traced a path down her cheek. It was not a tear of weakness or sorrow, but of profound relief and peace. That secret ledger had once been a curse, forcing her into the life of a fugitive, hiding in a rundown cannery, and pushing her to the brink of life and death. But it had also been the key that allowed her to topple a corrupt and powerful family and reclaim her integrity and self-respect. She opened her eyes and watched the red tips of the incense burn. All the humiliation and sorrow from her years as a submissive daughter-in-law had been burned away. Sarah stood up, brushed the sand from her pants, gave Walter's grave one final bow, and walked away. The rickety bus rumbled out of the terminal, taking Sarah back to the coast, back to Astoria. There were no ghosts of the past there, only Miller and the cannery waiting for her to return and start a new, honest life built with her own 2 hands. Outside the window, the red sun was slowly sinking below the horizon. The last rays of light cast a warm glow on Sarah's serene face. The dark journey was over. Tomorrow the sun would rise again, bright and new, illuminating the proud, free life she had clawed her way out of the mud to build for herself. Hey kid, take another look at this month's shipping manifest. The distributors in Portland are calling non-stop, rushing the order, but this batch of anchovy paste is a little too dark. I can't bottle it yet. Miller walked into the cool, tin-roofed office they had built next to the cannery, wiping sweat from his brow with a towel. The unique smell of sea salt and fermented fish was embedded in every fiber of his work clothes. Sarah looked up from her computer screen, pushed her glasses up her nose, and took the stack of papers from him with a smile. Don't worry, Miller. I'll tell the crew to keep stirring those barrels and not to rush the pressing. I spoke with the distributor yesterday. They said they're willing to wait another 10 days for the quality of our premium anchovy paste. Even if we're a little late, quality has to be our top priority. We can't compete with the big factories on volume. Hearing Sarah's clear, confident words, a smile spread across Miller's wrinkled face. After the thugs had wrecked the cannery, that terrible night everything had nearly been lost. But it was Sarah with the cool-headed logic of an experienced bookkeeper who had rolled up her sleeves and rebuilt the failing business from the ashes. In the early days after her return from Seattle, Sarah had been faced with a scene of devastation, broken barrels, spoiled product seeping into the ground. More than half the workers had left scared off by the violence and the subsequent police investigation. Sarah didn't cry or hesitate. She pooled her meager savings with the small amount of capital Miller had stashed under his bed and began to meticulously rebuild penny by penny. First, Sarah completely overhauled the cannery's archaic financial system. No more scribbling debts on the back of cement bags. She bought a second-hand computer and created spreadsheets that clearly tracked income expenses, labor, and material costs. This financial transparency helped Miller manage risk and prevent foolish losses. Next, Sarah realized the cannery's weakness wasn't quality, but sales channels. For years, Miller had just quietly fermented fish and sold it cheap to small local vendors. Sarah decided to change that. She drove to Portland herself, carrying samples of their traditionally made anchovy paste, and knocked on the doors of large supermarkets and organic food distributors. She didn't use slick sales pitches. She convinced them with the product itself, its rich, salty flavor, and a lab report showing high protein content with no chemical additives. Her earnestness paid off. A small chain of specialty grocery stores signed a trial contract. Word of mouth spread, and the cannery's clean, savory flavor slowly won over discerning customers. "You know all the workers are singing your praises," Sarah Miller said, pulling up a chair and taking a gulp of iced tea. "One of the delivery guys told me that since you took over the books, they get paid on time and they even got a holiday bonus. Said his wife and kids back home don't have to worry about going hungry anymore. Looking at you now. You're so capable. A world away from the girl who was hiding in corners clutching that old ledger." Sarah smiled faintly. "I just did what I know how to do, Miller. You were the one who took me in when I was at my lowest point. This cannery is your life's work. I'll never let it fall apart again." The Astoria sea breeze blew through the office, rustling the hem of Sarah's simple blouse. The subservient, timid daughter-in-law was gone, burned away. Rising from the ashes, Sarah had redefined her life. Sharp, independent, and full of self-worth, she had proven that a woman pushed to the edge if she refuses to break can become a fire that burns away all dark prejudices. "Sarah, you're over 30 now, right? You're pretty smart, and you're running this whole business. Haven't you thought about finding someone to lean on starting fresh?" An older woman from the bottling line asked, wiping sweat from her brow and giving Sarah a knowing look. It was late afternoon and the sun was setting over the Pacific. The workers were cleaning up, getting ready to go home. Sarah, recording the last numbers in the daily log, looked up. A serene smile touched her lips, but her eyes were firm. "Thank you for your concern, ma'am. But right now my head is full with ledgers and fish barrels. I don't have the energy to add a husband to the mix. Please tell that young man to look elsewhere. I have no intention of ever getting married again." With that, Sarah gathered her papers, waved goodbye to the crew, and walked out of the cannery. She took a stroll along the breakwater, breathing in the salty, fishy air of the vast ocean. In the distance, the horn of a fishing boat signaled its return to port, breaking the evening's quiet. Many people in this small fishing town couldn't understand why a woman like Sarah, who had overcome a failed marriage and now had a stable business, would choose to be alone. They held on to the old-fashioned idea that no matter how capable a woman was, she needed a husband to lean on, a man to shelter her from life's storms. In their gossip, they hoped for a fairy tale ending where a perfect, wealthy man would appear and heal all of Sarah's past wounds. But reality was no fairy tale. Sarah stopped and leaned against the concrete railing, watching the waves crash against the massive rocks below. A place to lean on. She had a place to lean on once it was called her in-laws. A handsome husband, a pious mother-in-law, a beautiful house in Seattle. But what lay behind that glamorous facade? Rot, conspiracy, blood money, and terrifying lies. They had seen her as a tool to be exploited and a scapegoat to be sacrificed. The trauma of that patriarchal prison, the suffocating memory of being used and ignored in the place she called home, had left an indelible scar on her soul. She had escaped that mire only by paying a heavy price, with blood tears and the sheer terror of that night running through the rain, clutching a ledger. Now standing firmly on her own 2 feet with her own hard-earned money in the bank and the genuine respect of Miller and dozens of workers, Sarah realized she didn't need any man to save her. She didn't want someone to come into her life to soothe her wounds because she had already healed herself with her own strength and perseverance. If love were to come, it would have to be a meeting of 2 free souls, not the desperate clinging of someone in need of pity. And for now, she was perfectly content with the absolute freedom she held in her hands. In the distance, dozens of fishing boats were noisily returning to the harbor, their powerful lights illuminating the docks. The shouts of fishermen, the roar of engines, and the clatter of crates created a chaotic but vibrant symphony of life. Sarah closed her eyes and spread her arms, embracing the sea wind. It whipped through her hair and clothes, leaving a cool sensation on her skin. The roar of the ocean seemed to wash away all the dark dregs of the past. No more of Eleanor's shrieks, Simon's mad destruction, or the deep-seated fear of the man named Blackwood. Thank you for listening to today's story to the very end. Sometimes life is not just about love or hate, but about life and death choices, where the truth comes at a great cost. Through this story, I hope we can all cherish the people beside us more, and always remain vigilant in the face of things that seem familiar. I look forward to bringing you another interesting story next time. Thank you.